Hello. I'm not sure if people can hear me.
Yeah, Mona, I can hear you perfectly.
Okay. Hello.
I can hear you, Mona.
Okay, sorry, Roberta. What I'm seeing on my screen now is like a mirror maze of a screen going. Aha, there you go. Now I can see it.
Okay, I will make you the presenter now, so you will manage this
Perfect.
slide.
Perfect. Sorry.
Here you
Okay.
have.
Yeah, I can manage now.
Yeah,
All right then. So is it okay if I then start?
of course. The floor
Thank
is
you.
yours.
The floor, the table, the desk. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for having me here. It is great to have listened to all the presentations up until now. My presentation is on education for sustainable development, but it focuses on education for sustainable development within the geographical school curriculum. And it is a Romanian, at the moment, case study. I am based in Romania, so I'm sort of more of an international educator. I'm working for Cambridge International Assessment Education, but I'm also a PhD student at the University, Alexandru Cuza University of Iași. And this study has been done together with my university professor, Corneliu Iatu, who I'm not sure whether he is present or not. He said he would be, but of course he has a lot of other engagement. So I would like to set the context of our study. So we place our study in the context that education, not that I do have to tell you this, is a very powerful agent of change, and the sustainability of the lives that we lead is of global interest. A couple of weeks ago, I was in a webinar on the role of universities and regions in the Sustainable Development Goals implementation process, and Thomas Arnold, an advisor for Sustainable Development Goals in the European Commission, called these goals planetary emergencies. And I thought that was a very dramatic choice of words. However, I did understand them because he mentions that the crisis is a systemic and an interconnected one. The importance now of education for sustainable development is highlighted, of course, by many researchers in the field and organizations such as UNESCO, OECD, United Nations, and they place the responsibilities of education for sustainable development on ministries of education to review the purpose of their education in light of sustainable development goals and to align learning with these goals. In different official documents, they ask for education for sustainable development to be an integrated practice at a local, regional, national, and international level, and to be integrated in policies, in teacher education, in student assessment. Much to what my prior colleagues have mentioned, there is a strong link between educating for the future, a very fortunate alignment with our conference title, and the skills that Patricia was talking about, or that Julie was writing in the chat, the skills for the future that students need for our future. Somewhere I find that education for sustainable development is somewhere there with the skills that they mentioned. It links to our own very existence on our planet. Now, why geography and not why something else? Now, I'm a geographer, of course, so I'm passionate about it. But many geographers in the literature write about the connection between what modern geography studies and sustainable development. And I put an emphasis on modern geography, because though traditionally geography was mainly preoccupied with locations and scale, these are now integrated within the interdependencies found between the social, the economic, the environmental world in which we live. And similarly, there are studies which explore the marginal role geography has within school education, because it continues to have a traditional approach in many places, particularly in the Romanian educational system. Therefore, they see sustainable development as an opportunity for geography to show its relevance and its agency. Now, if I am to focus a little bit more only on the Romanian educational system briefly, before the fall of communism, like in many other countries, geography was used as a propaganda tool, and physical geography dominated most school textbooks. And though there have been several reforms and the content has somewhat been adapted, there are strong reminiscence from those times. Equally, there has been what we consider to be an attempt to squeeze geography out of the curriculum by reducing the number of hours dedicated to the subject in the lower secondary sector and completely removing them from the higher upper high school, or however it's called in different scenarios. So there's also this kind of an attack that we feel on the geography curriculum in our place anyway. In Romania, the Romanian department, because we do have one for sustainable development, recognizes education for sustainable development as a key instrument for reaching the goals and sets its target for 2030 that all learners gain the skills and the knowledge needed to provide, as you see here is a direct quote from their document, needed for sustainable development. The Romanian Ministry of Education has a page dedicated to education for sustainable development, but mentions very briefly that education for sustainable development is integrated across different subjects, including in extracurricular activities. Now, the literature in the field does mention that it is not necessarily targeted to one subject, but that it is welcomed if it is integrated within sort of cross-curricular. But without a clear integration framework, without clear guidelines, we believe that sustainable development concepts roam the curriculum aimlessly, thus having very little chances of being fully enforced. So it is within this context that I've set my research questions. And what at the moment I'm trying to find out is, or my research questions have been, how the Romanian geographical education presents the concept of sustainable development, how the learners, and in order to do that, I looked at the textbook content and I looked at the learning tasks. And then what are the views and the expectations of both learners and teachers regarding these themes of sustainable development that are present or not in the geographical school education in Romania. So as a methodology, what I've used so far was to do content analysis using MaxQDA on 2 textbooks. And we've chosen the Year 11 textbooks because they are dedicated by the Ministry of Education to deal with the fundamentals. They're actually called the fundamentals, the fundamental problems of our contemporary world. So I've chosen these 2 books. They are the only ones endorsed by the Romanian Ministry of Education. They are similar in size. So I did a content analysis, and then I looked at the tasks, at the learning tasks, and I kind of classified them according to Bloom's taxonomy to see where they're mainly are. And then we've conducted semi-structured questionnaires, and we were lucky enough to receive 39 geography teachers' responses and 487 learners' responses. So if I now go to sort of the results that we've received so far, they're different. When analyzing the learning tasks, the vast majority of them were open-ended. We see that one textbook has significantly more tasks than the other. The dominant tasks were recall tasks, and most of them take the form of open-ended questions, like I've mentioned earlier, with questions readily available, with the answer to the questions readily available in the text. But there are also fill in the gaps and multiple choice kind of exercises. I've noticed that one textbook A, focuses a vast amount of their tasks at the end of the chapter with very few tasks in between or at the end of lessons, whereas textbook B, only 29% of those, and the rest are distributed within the lessons. Now, with regards to their analysis on the Bloom's taxonomy, we've identified the same very traditional, what I call a traditional approach, focused on lower order thinking skills of knowledge and understanding mainly. Both textbooks allow for essay writing. Textbook A considerably more opportunities for that. And they both have end of chapter summative evaluation tests. But what we do find overwhelmingly, if you look at the two graphs, is that textbook B, for example, almost more than half of those tasks were pure knowledge, is where you lift the answer from the text. And this is year 11 students in the Romanian educational system, which is the equivalent, like, let's say, of a 17-year-old studying geography. And now we then wonder where those skills, where they should get to the higher university that my previous colleagues were mentioning, or how are they cultivated in lower education, in lower skills. So when we look then at the content analysis, so these were just the tasks analysis, very briefly, because my study is very more in depth than this. The coding for content analysis was based on the Sustainable Development Goals. So I had the 17 themes, and kind of like it was paragraph coding. So I had to go and see, okay, which one does it link to, which theme, and if it does. So I only coded the ones that were somehow linked, and then I decided to go on to a prerequisite knowledge, in other words, what was considered important information for understanding the notions of poverty, for example, or alternative sources of energy, or climate global change. So those were a prerequisite. So what a learner should know. So they should know, for example, that there is solar and wind energy, and there's geothermal power. So these were prerequisite. They're not linked explicitly with Sustainable Development Goals, or implicitly for that matter. So the prerequisite information, and then the SDGs, or Sustainable Development Goals information. And in this term, the SDGs were divided into implicit reference was made, or explicit reference. And the explicit reference was that where we could identify specific targets within the SDG in the content of that textbook. So, for example, an explicit reference would be that there needs to be a thorough ecological education, which should start in schools to create an environmental culture and to stop environmental degradation. This explicitly links with target 4.7. So that was coded as explicit reference to SDG. Okay, so, and I had a different one, but a different kind of coding as well, but it's not the scope now because we need to move on. So the noticeable difference, when I looked at the textbook comparison, we realized that there seems to be a similar approach to textbooks with some noticeable differences here and there. We noticed that climate change, and I'm going to link to climate change here. You see it 13 here, this one here, seems to appear far more in textbook B than in textbook A. I picked on this one because I'm going to link it with data from teachers and learners and from their questionnaires later on. But when we look at this graph, which is the content analysis graph, one could easily see, and notice, possibly understand the prevalence of certain themes traditionally linked with geography, showing maybe the strength of this traditional approach in the curriculum. So we see there life on land, affordable energy, climate change, industry. These are traditional geographical approaches or content of geography, whereas other topics seem to barely figure. Gender equality, for example, granted, they may be better suited in other school subjects, but the weak representation of the theme of no poverty, you see it there, this green one here, raises some concerns and some questions for us. We also wanted to get the understanding of the themes related to sustainable development, which are of immediate importance and relevance to learners and to teachers. So it was interesting to notice that access to education, you see it there first, which links with objective 4, is of great importance to both teachers and learners. Good health and well-being, as well, you see it here, number 4, this line here, again, very important for both learners and teachers, but from here on, the interests seem to diverge. What seems to stand out for learners are the themes with direct, immediate impact on their own personal level, like well-being. You see it here, as I said here with yellow, sorry, it's the fourth one, but food, affordable sources, there goes the learners here. Social justice, no poverty. So where the learners, the dark orange, is sort of along on the graph. And what we also notice again for teachers are the themes with a stronger traditional theoretical background, like alternative sources of energy and climate change.
3 minutes left, please.
Yes, thank you very much. So I've also looked at the development of the idea, the coverage of the sustainable development themes. Now, this is not per paragraph, but how long the paragraph is. They seem to be mainly the same, with the exception of, I'm looking here, zero hunger, which is not often identified in textbook, but it's in larger paragraphs, is more developed. Our questionnaires were from these areas, these parts of the country. I'm going to quickly move on through what they show. When we looked at what's the main source of knowledge for students and for learners, there's no surprise that teachers get their information from more of a variety of sources than learners do. Learners still consider school and internet to be their main important source of knowledge. We applied questions regarding their perceptions, and I'm sorry this doesn't have the animation here, but both in high proportions we noticed that both teachers and learners consider sustainable development to be a topic important, one, and B, to be important to be taught through geography. And this issue comes across here as well. When asked deliberately which subjects are most suited to be taught, to teach sustainable development, and we see in very high proportion geography here, 100% for teachers. Of course, there were geography teachers themselves, but we notice the personal development as being not really identified by teachers, but being highly identified by learners. Again, maybe that it's linked, it's addressed more, they view it more linked to their own personal development, therefore they see it as a more integrative approach, which is what personal development teaches, not specifically theoretical knowledge. And my last two slides, in terms of who should be responsible for promoting education for sustainable development, we notice great differences between teachers and learners. Their opinions somewhat are similar when they consider school as the main actor. However, teachers seem to place a great deal of responsibility on other players, more than the learners do. Our general conclusions are that the Romanian geographical education at the moment does not offer opportunities for sustainable education for sustainable development, that the learners' interests do not correspond with the content and the learning tasks in their textbooks, that both learners and teachers consider geography to be important to promote education for sustainable development. But the learning tasks, as I mentioned earlier, they're not really up to promoting the skills that both I and my colleagues previously mentioned, and it is important in education for the future. I thank you very much for the time. I hope I've managed to fit in the time allocated.
Yes, you've done perfectly, Mona. Thank you very much for your presentation. This was very clearly presented, and many valuable insights from your data, and the wealth of data you have from a qualitative and quantitative perspective is really fantastic. And yeah, congratulations on your research. So speaking about your content analysis of the textbooks, what year was the publication of these textbooks? Are they fairly new textbooks being published and used in the school, or are they kind of several years in the process already?
Both textbooks are reviewed by the Ministry of Education on a regular basis. However, it is very interesting to notice that the date of publication was relatively old. One was 2016, I think. However, it does raise question of how is the review being done if the content hasn't really been changed? So yeah, it's another question that we need to address, or we have sort of like we discovered in our study that though we do review them, we don't adapt it to be up to date with the concepts that should be taught.
Absolutely. And there's a follow-up question on the textbooks as well, or more or less the analysis of it, from Octavia. Can you mention again the software you used for the linguistic analysis of the content in the textbooks?
Max QDA.
Yeah,
there are others. I have learned.
Perfect. There's of course other software as well.
Yes,
right?
there are. It's just I've only looked at it, and to be perfectly honest, I clicked it because it does need my research, but it is an open source up to 30 days of trial, and after that you do pay for it. But it was enough for me to see whether I needed it or not, or whether. So it gives you quite a good time span to realize whether it is what you need or not. And of course, the open source has only certain functions open for you, but enough to create quite good analysis, in my opinion.
You are now unmuted.
Absolutely, and of course, this software also helps, in all qualitative aspects, and it has plenty of options, Max QDA. And it can be also there's also a license for using it in your teaching courses. So that's what I use very often. So that's not only a side note. So I wonder, looking at the teachers' perspectives, are there any professional development initiatives focusing on sustainable development goals in teacher education, like in the pre-service or in-service teachers?
Yes. Of course, I could not present all the conclusions of the questionnaires, but one question was whether teachers were willing to participate in professional development courses for sustainable development. And in a vast majority of them, they said that they are interested in the topic, that it's not really promoted, and it's not something that is out there for their development. What is out there is courses for professional development when they are in service. There's a great skill now, or sort of there's a great focus now on skills education, because Romania continues to be a very much a traditional focused sort of content knowledge based. But no, the answer to the question is no for the in service. For the pre-service, there are courses at the university which address education for sustainable development, but not for you to teach it, whereas for you to know about it. So there is a need for this as well, definitely. And to answer Camilla's question,
yes, just quickly, because we have
very quickly. Yes, no, definitely. Camilla, I think I read that you guys are from Sweden. You guys are amazing in the amount of research that you do, and the Nordic cultures Nordic countries in general, on the amount of research that you do for education for sustainable development. And I have read a lot about it. My interest is to actually do an international study and to compare textbooks and to see the approach of how education for sustainable development is taught in different places. I've started with Romania as I'm at the beginning of my research, but the aim is to do a wider one. And I know there's a lot of studies done in Netherlands, in Sweden, in Norway. There's a great focus for me to go there and find out more about it. Thank you very much.
Sounds great, Mona, and all the best for your future research. This sounds amazing, and we're looking forward to your next findings here. So let's move on. We're just on time into the next presentation. This is called Matching Learners with